Over a year and a half ago, I made a video called Requiem for Answers. The point of the video was to detail the history of the stand arrow and explain exactly what the Requiem arrow or special arrow does. And well, since that video was uploaded, part 5 has had its scans completed and details that were originally lost in translation have come forth. Thus, I feel the original video is incredibly outdated and in need of an update. So here is a true Requiem for Answers. So 10,000 years prior to the events of Even Phantomblood, a large meteorite smashed into the Earth. It touched down near Cape York, Greenland, and was called the Cape York Meteorite. Its impact split the meteorite into 8 different pieces, which all had different craters, and since they were all discovered at different times, they were all given different names. The first being the Tent, which was discovered in 1884. Then the Woman and the Dog were discovered in 1897, followed soon by Savitch 1 in 1913, then Thule in 1955, Savitch 2 in 1961, The Man in 1963, and then lastly Turniput in 1984. The meteorite itself was comprised mostly of nickel and iron and was considered an octahedrite, though there was one more piece of this meteorite, one that was so dangerous it had to be stricken from the records, as it was found in between the time of The Man and Turniput. The reason it was so dangerous is it carried with it something much more than just simple space nickel and iron. This piece carried with it the key to evolution. This crash site was uncovered in 1978 by a group of excavators who were looking to assess the resources of the crater. And while doing so, 2 of the researchers ended up getting minor wounds from just casual excavation work. Nothing too out of the ordinary for someone who does excavation professionally. Though it was through these cuts that something was discovered within the crater. A virus. Something completely out of the ordinary. But not only was this virus from the exoatmosphere, it had laid here for over 10,000 years, evolving in one of the coldest possible climates where no other known bacteria or virus could even be imagined to survive. And the way they did this was by feeding off each other and thinning out the weaker viruses, until they reached a point that the virus could cull life itself, or selectively slaughter aspects of life itself. And then when this virus entered the bloodstream of a person, it begins to cull the person as a whole, giving them an unknown sickness that affected them right down to their very soul. Any normal person would die from this virus within 48 hours, but if a person shows a strong enough force of will and a deep enough motivation, they will overcome this culling and achieve an evolution within their soul. This is also known as a stand. And along with this, when these meteorites were discovered by primitive humans at the time, long before even the excavation of the original meteorite crash site, they viewed this sickness as something bestowed upon them by the gods. One man felt that these meteorites would help him achieve the power of those said gods, and so he stole a piece of the meteorite and forged them into arrowheads. And much like the stone masks of the Pillar Men, the creator of these said arrows created very basic versions of them first. These would be shaven down and have massive holes in the middle of them, with very slight bits of the virus's metal covering the edges, allowing a person to take a smaller dose of the virus, giving them a higher chance of survival. Though this practice of using the prototype arrows would only get humanity so far. So, over his years of traveling and crafting, the arrow's creator forged his perfect arrow, one much thicker and marked with a beetle accessory. This arrow would be given a much larger dose of the virus, making it extremely dangerous in comparison, shown by it not only causing the disease as the regular arrows do, but also ripping massive holes in the people who it hits, and dissolving the bodies of the unworthy. But its reward for survival would be a stand, but not an ordinary stand. This stand would be given the life-culling ability of the viruses themselves, the ones that they developed over the years of isolation and cannibalization. Though before the arrows could be fully used by their creator, he passed away and had them buried in the deserts of Egypt, where they wouldn't be found until 1986, where they were unearthed by a 19-year-old upstart archaeologist who then later went on to steal them and disappear into the dead of night. This man went on to sell 5 of the 6 arrows that he found in Egypt to Enyi the Hag for an enormous amount of money. He then went on to use this money to buy a high position within a gang, where he would use his remaining arrow and his power that he possibly gained from said arrow to systematically deconstruct and take over the gang that he had joined, and in turn, take over all of Italy. Though if we continue to follow the journey of these arrows, we reach Enya, who, being in touch with fortune telling and the mystic arts, was able to discern the true power of all of these arrows, and she went on to use the special arrow, or the Requiem arrow, to give Dio his stand, given that he has the highest chance of success due to his immortal body, but it's also because she wanted him to have the most powerful stand in the world, given they both also name it the world. Which also explains why Dio never tries to bites the dust himself as well, as using any of the lower grade prototype arrows would be an egotistical insult to himself, and he already believed himself to have one of the strongest stands possible. Yet again, Dio's own incompetence and ego prevents him from being the strongest thing alive, which is honestly one of the greatest things about Dio as a character. And since Dio was wearing Jonathan's body, the Requiem arrow passed down this power onto both Jotaro and Holly. But Jotaro was the only one able to actually control it, and Joseph didn't get this because he had already unlocked the stand at that point, given the interviews we've had with Araki later on, with Araki basically saying that Joseph has had his stand since Battle Tendency. And also, this sort of explains the life manipulation power that both Giorno and Josuke would get, as this arrow is able to gift its power down bloodlines, but it starts to dissipate as it goes down, which also might explain why Jotaro and Dio have very similar stands. Though for the other 4 arrows that Enya bought, Dio and Enya used them to scout out people who would aid Dio in his journey to conquer the entire world. These arrows were way more disposable, given that they were basically prototypes of the finished Requiem arrow that they already possessed and were already using. And this allowed Dio and Enya to actually part with these arrows more casually than they would something like the Requiem arrow. And because of this, they actually ended up all over the place. So let's actually do a rundown of the history of each of these arrows and where they ended up over the events of all 6 parts. So you first have arrow number 1, the first arrow we actually see in the entire series, unless you watch the anime. This was bought by Okuyasu's dad and was used primarily by Keicho and Akira during the events of part 4, and it finally ended up in possession of Jotaro Kujo and the Speedwagon Foundation. It is likely the arrow that was broken down and studied to understand how the arrows work, and a piece of it was given to Jolene, which ultimately was lost in the Green Dolphin prison. And then you have arrow number 2, which was bought by Yoshihiro Kira. The arrow was used by Yoshihiro to awaken his own son's stand, Killer Queen. He did this so his son could live a peaceful life and always have the advantage over regular people. But his son soon found himself backed into a corner by other stand users, so Yoshihiro donned the arrow yet again, and used it to make a handful of new stand users throughout all of Morio to either distract or defeat the people pursuing his son. But then, when all of his plans fell through, his son began to panic, and the arrow itself began to feel Yoshikage Kira's strong desires and pierced him a second time, fusing together with his stand and mixing 2 of his abilities together to create the Bites the Dust ability, while also destroying itself in the process, ending the journey of arrow number 2. Arrow number 3 was a prototype arrow discovered in Dio's mansion, alongside the Requiem arrow. This arrow was likely the one used to give his assassins their abilities like Vanilla Ice or Indole. It's also likely the origin of the piece of arrow given to Jolene to unlock her stand, and was either ultimately lost in the Green Dolphin prison, or was put into captivity by the Speedwagon Foundation. And then you have arrow number 4, which was the one that Diavolo kept when he sold off 5 of the 6. And after becoming the boss of Passion, he passed it down to Popo, who would become Passion's own rookie tester, where he would take the arrow and use it to test new members, either killing them or unlocking their stands. But the arrow itself was destroyed along with Black Sabbath and Popo when Giorno made Popo shoot himself with a banana inside of his own prison cell. And then you have the last of the prototype arrows, arrow number 5, which is actually completely unaccounted for, and was assumedly found by Jotaro and Polnareff at some point, and possibly destroyed. It's also possible to be the arrow that was broken up and given to Jolene, but then again, that's 3 out of the 5 arrows that could have done that, so it's really up in the air on that. If you want to give arrow number 5 a special place, you can make it Jolene's arrow, which later then gets lost in the Green Dolphin prison. And then we reach the big daddy arrow of them all, the complete arrow, aka the Requiem arrow, arrow number 6. Kept as a personal tool for Dio after unlocking his stand, Dio used the arrow to seek out those with true power, shown when he meets Pucci, and the arrow is drawn to him. And when Pucci shows a strong desire, the arrow actually pierces Pucci and gives him and his brother stands, much like how Dio gave the Joestar stands. And then the arrow was uncovered by Polnareff inside Dio's mansion after he was defeated alongside another regular arrow. It had its true potential discovered 10 years later when Polnareff accidentally nicked Silver Chariot's finger on the arrow and forcibly evolved it into a Requiem, but because Polnareff was no longer able to control his stand fully, the Requiem went completely out of control, swapping souls randomly. Polnareff discerned that this ability was the only way to stop Diavolo and used it as a last-ditch effort against him. But the stand became an automatic stand because Polnareff couldn't control it and was completely outwitted by Diavolo and defeated. And then after overcoming Chariot Requiem, instead of landing into Diavolo's hands, the arrow actually ends up in Giorno Giovanna's hands, who himself would use it to evolve his gold experience, a stand that was arguably created by this arrow into gold experience Requiem. And given Giorno's strength and drive, he overcame the arrow's dangerous test and achieved a stand that could freely control every living thing's soul, allowing Giorno to control when things begin and end for a person. Gold experience Requiem ended up completely absorbing the stand arrow's culling ability, and much like his father, Giorno kept it as a very valuable keepsake from that point on. Now I should clear up some information about the Requiem arrow that was passed around by people, me included, when the translations weren't very good. The Requiem arrow doesn't just give its wielder what they desire most at its specific moment of use. That is just the natural stand ability when it comes to evolution. See Echoes as an example. What the arrow does is allow those who pass its test to control or manipulate souls in some way, be it in Whitesnake and its ability to turn souls into discs, or even later on when Made in Heaven is able to allow Pucci to rewrite souls of those who died on the move over to the next universe. And then you have the World, which has the ability to completely freeze souls in place, or the World Over Heaven, which has the ability to completely rewrite reality, or even Chariot Requiem, which has the ability to shift souls around, even souls that exist in other dimensions. And then lastly, you have Gold Experience Requiem, which fully changes or controls souls in every possible way. So a Requiem ability is tied specifically to souls and not the desire of the user. Also, the disease found in Holly and Josuke after the arrow is used on Dio is not the same as taking a direct shot of the arrow. For Holly and Josuke, it is just them being sick by the fact that their stands are being forced out of them, where if you take a shot from an arrow, it is an actual disease trying to eat away at your body. Now, where does the name Requiem come from? It's actually in reference to Mozart's Requiem, a song designed to originally settle the souls of the dead or allow them to rest in peace. The point being, the song was designed to change the state of someone's soul, and the idea was carried quite literally into GioGio. Also, a neat little detail about the Requiems in GioGio is that the Chariot Requiem design, the one that looks like a conquistador, is in reference to the conquistador who commissioned Mozart originally to create his Requiem. But then Mozart died before he could actually complete his Requiem, which is referenced by the fact that Chariot Requiem is an incomplete Requiem, and that Polnareff technically dies when creating it. But then later, in honor of a dying wife of a count, the Requiem was completed by another man, which is referenced by Giorno picking up the arrow and completing the Requiem that Polnareff started. Just neat little details like that that Araki likes to weave into his stories. And the last little bit about the Requiem arrow is that it appears to be the only arrow that it has the ability to pass stands down bloodlines, as the both times that it happens in the series, it was done by the Requiem arrow. Also, the only recorded event of a bloodline unlocking a stand via a prototype arrow is Massimo Volpe and Tonio Trisardi. But Tonio claims that his stand is completely natural, and along with this you have evidence that shows the opposite, that the regular prototype arrows do not unlock stands within families through Koichi, as he got shot with a prototype arrow and his family remained the same. So there's a very strong chance that the Requiem arrow is the only one that can do such. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this historical breakdown of stand arrows and the Requiem arrows and what they can do. And I hope this helped clear up any misinformation about these items. And if you enjoyed this video and would like to support more videos like it in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/ManyNotTheBadGuy. And if you want a stand arrow of your own, well, first you have to head on over to funimation.com/show/Shimonetta, a boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist, and then you can take the case of that, of the box case, and forge it down and create your own Requiem arrow. And if you do that, please send it to me, and I would love that, honestly.